Going to start recording. Hello, everybody. My name is Ned Dennison. I'm an open water swimmer and organizer based in Kinsale, Cork, Ireland. We had an explosion of open water swimming in the last 20, 25 years in this area. And the guy that I credit for literally getting that train moving is Stephen Black. Stephen, say hello.
Hi, hello everybody.
Can you give an introduction of your open water background from start in South Africa, slide your way over to Dublin, and then down to Cork, if you would?
No problem at all, Ned. Okay, so I moved from South Africa to the UK in 1987, but I wasn't a swimmer at all. I could swim, but that was about it. And I used to body surf a lot on the Indian Ocean side of Cape Town. I used to run half marathons, and I arrived in the UK, and the weather was so different to Cape Town that it was dark in the morning and dark in the evening, and usually very, very cold. So I took up swimming, and I went to Glenalbyn Pool in 1992 to a stroke correction or stroke improvement class. And I went to that for about 3 or 4 months, and I was getting some exercise out of that. But most important of all, every time I came out of that session, there was a queue of people going in to do the Glenalbyn Club session. So I got talking to people, and one day somebody said, "Hey, Blackie, your name's on a list over there. You better check out the notice board." And I went and I checked out the notice board, wondering what was going on. And somebody had written my name down that entered me actually in the Liffey swim. And they had paid £10 for me to do it at that time. And I just couldn't believe this. And I said, "Are you serious?" So they said, "Yeah." And they were laughing about it, these three fellas. And I said, "Okay, I'll do it if you will." So that was the beginning in May 1992 of my swimming journey, or open water swimming journey, should I say. And the same for Tommy O'Brien and Dave Dunn and Paul Burke, the other three fellas from Glenalbyn. So we signed up and we swam for Glenalbyn in the Leinster Open Water swimming series. And we swam, I swam with them 1992, 93, 94. 1995, I moved down to Kinsale, and there was no open water swimming, but as luck would have it, the same three people had come to Kinsale with me to help me find a house. And whilst we were waiting to view a house in Sandycove in Kinsale, one of them said, "Oh, why don't we swim around that island?" So we swam around Sandycove Island. We then drove up the hill and we looked at the house. And then the three of them recommended that I bought this house because they could come down from Dublin and swim. So that was in that was April 1995. And I suppose you could say almost the rest is history. So what happened after that was the same people and a bunch of the people that I knew from the Dublin Open Water Swimming Group, they said, "Oh, why don't you organise a swim for us down there when the Dublin Open Water, when the Leinster Open Water Series finishes for the year? Could you organise a swim for us?" So I organised the swim, and there were actually 98 swimmers, and I think 93 of them came from Dublin for that. And then there were 5 locals. During the time that early 19 and mid 1995, I had joined Cork Master Swimming Club. There were very few people interested in swimming in the sea. They were all pool swimmers. But I happened to be doing a swim. I used to swim out to the island and back for my own exercise and sort of mental health and well-being. And I was swimming back one day, and when I arrived back at the shore, there was a film crew making an advert to put in the Cork Examiner, as it was in those days. And somebody came to me and said, "Oh, I hope you don't mind. We took a photograph of you swimming back, and we'd like to put it in the newspaper." And they interviewed me, and I said, "Yeah, well, I live up here. I swim for Cork Masters, and I'm trying to get people interested in swimming in the sea as they do in Dublin. There aren't a lot of takers at the moment." And so an article was written, and there was a colour photograph of me on the cover of what was the Cork Examiner weekend supplement. And the same day that it appeared, that was the Saturday, somebody called Bill Steigletter, who was a retired American holidaymaker who had bought a house locally. He contacted me somehow through the newspaper, and he said, "Oh, could I come and join you for a swim?" So he came and joined me for a swim. So he became Sandycove swimmer number 2, and then things started to sort of snowball from there. Mike Harris became swimmer number 3, and then Joe Donnelly and Terry Fleming, Vincent Cassidy. There were a load of people that then started joining in, and we used to swim variously on the inside of the island. As we became more confident about the region and the conditions, we started swimming around the island. Anytime from sort of an hour before high tide, as opposed to until an hour after high tide, we used to swim around the island, and we used to have weekly time trials during the summer months. And it went on like that for a few years. We toyed with the idea of having a local league, but there were no other swims in the area, and people weren't really that keen on it. They were quite happy to turn up. It was, I suppose, sort of casual but competitive, I suppose one could say. And we had a mixed bag of slow swimmers, novice swimmers, very competent swimmers. But I think the nicest thing about it all is that everybody looked out for everybody else. And then I can't remember what year you turned up, Ned. 1990.
Yeah, before we go on from that, Stephen, it's
Yes.
probably worth saying that newspaper coverage of open water swimming in the Cork area was virtually non-existent in those days. So to have an article in the Cork Examiner with a picture on the front page of the weekend supplement would have just been absolutely unheard of. There might have been a half a column each once a year talking about something, but newspaper coverage didn't exist. And even into 2000, 2002, 3, 4, very little media coverage, very little. So that article was probably one of the key elements that I never knew about to get the whole thing started.
Okay, well, what you said there is entirely right, because it was just a stroke of luck. What happened was, believe it or not, back then I used to be able to do a little bit of butterfly, and I was actually swimming butterfly back from the island, which is, as you know, is not exactly a long swim, of course, but I was swimming back, amusing my silly self. There was nobody down there at all in those days, and I didn't realize that they were setting up cameras to do this photo shoot. And they took a photograph of me doing the butterfly, I suppose, about halfway out back to the slipway, with a zoom, and then they put that on the cover. It was a spectacular picture, I have to say that. It just captured the moment. It was late in the afternoon, the sun, it was the late spring, the sun was low in the sky, the lighting was just absolutely superb, and it was a full color picture. So yes, that's what sort of kicked things off. And yeah, there would have been no coverage. I mean, there was nobody else that I had ever met through Cork Masters or otherwise that had been swimming open water in any way, shape, or form. So yeah, it did kick it off. We were very, very lucky.
There are some people who tell stories about swimming around Sandycove in those years, but they would have come down, done a swim when no one was around, and not said anything to anybody, and come back 5 years later or something. There were also the Lee Swim, which had originally been in the city for 80 years. The pollution got too bad. It moved down to the near the harbor entrance, ran for a couple of years down there. It had kind of fallen away. There were some people in Carrigaline who do a few swims. There was a river swim in the Lee from the county hall or something. So there was a bit of swimming, but as you say, very, very little. So
Well,
go ahead.
Carry on.
Now, I showed up intermittently in 2000 and moved to Cork and I think 2001. And my memory, and I'll get you to talk about it, is for whatever reason, you kind of half adopted me. I got put on some sort of strange text group, and there would be weird little messages going like, "We're swimming at Sandycove at 1 p.m. on Saturday." And then there'd be another message going, "Next week, we're going to Gugambara." And I went like, "What's a Gugambara?" and a group of us would go out. So it wasn't exactly a series, but there was a group of swims, and the names that I remember were Glandore, Shirkin Island, Union Hall, Loch Eyne, Guggenbarra. We did swims in Kerry, and it was a kind of a core group of 20, 30, 40 of us. I don't, if you put a fiver in for the swim for something, I don't remember. It was all very casual, and it was almost a secret because I think there was all sorts of insurance and safety issues. So no one really wanted it to be publicized in a big way because, as you say, we're kind of looking after each other. But so, how did you end up, organizing or getting people to organize these swims? Did Tig Harrington come to a few swims and you said to him, "Oh, by the way, you grew up at Guggenbarra. Come on, Tig."
Okay, so that's a very good point you made. There was, up until a certain point in time, or there had been a history of at least one or maybe two river swims, up to a certain point until the river was too badly polluted to facilitate them. So people like Mike Harris, people like Tig Harrington, Vincent Cassidy, Terry Fleming, and a few others had in the years gone by been participants in what was the original Lee swim. So they were only too pleased to find that things had kicked off again. So they were very, very avid, as they probably still are, very avid supporters of whatever it was we set out to do. And then there were other members of Cork Masters, like Dee Sheehan being a very good example of this. She had moved down to Glandore and she said, "Why don't we start putting on a swim in Glandore?" That was 1996. And so we decided that that would be the swim that would kick off our open water swimming year. So we had, and it still runs to this day, although we're no longer involved in it, but as a fundraiser for the RNLA, and they actually very generously supported us as well. We would swim from from Union Hall one way to Glandore, and then the Glandore Inn that Dee Sheehan and her husband owned at that time would put on a barbecue or a meal or whatever for us, and we would have a bit of a party. So that sort of kicked off, I suppose, in a more formal way then the social element, which became very, and still is a very important part or aspect of the open water swimming scene, both in West Cork or Munster, but elsewhere in the country. So then we started adding other swims to it, and you're quite right. Tig Harrington, the same year, 1996, said, "Hey, I come from Ballingeary. Is anyone interested in having a swim over in that direction?" And we said, "Well, what would you recommend?" And he said, "Well, Guggenbarra Lake." So then he started putting on the Guggenbarra Lake and organizing entertainment. A lady called Mary Toomey to play the flute on a boat and escort us around, which was all very entertaining. And another friend of hers would row but sing at the same time. So that was the start of another swim, the Guggenbarra swim, which sadly we don't have anymore, because again, on an informal basis, and I suppose in the sort of the very formative years of open water swimming in Munster, insurance never reared its ugly head. In later years it did, and it became increasingly difficult to get insurance cover, or the cost of securing insurance cover became prohibitively expensive. So a number of the earlier swims that we did, including Guggenbarra, fell by the wayside. But having said that, we had quite a strong core group of people, and they were also prepared to travel to other places to swim.
Yeah, I remember. All of us in maybe Tig Harrington's brother's kitchen with whatever the soup was the most delicious bit of soup, and there were bread rolls. Union Hall was an excuse to have a night at the B&B down the hill from the pub. The Shirkin swim was an excuse to have a night in Baltimore. And I think, in addition to insurance, Steve, it was a smallish group of people that knew each other. And I remember maybe a little later on, organizing a few night swims at Sandycove. They were absolutely fine until one year, like 10 people I had never seen showed up.
That's the
And I
problem.
said, I don't want to really be associated with these people charging out in the night around a swim they've never done before. Forget about insurance. It just scared me. And I do remember as well. You ran the Shirkin swim one year, and a young lady showed up with
That's what
no
I'm
cap,
laughing about.
no cap, no goggles, and ended up doing a vertical breaststroke. The safe she ended up with one of the. There were a few safety boats. She ended up with one of them, and you might have had a go at her parents afterwards about. She was about 12 years old. Like, how could you send your kid out there? She can't swim. Um, and I think we've become much more formal in the later years. Mix of wetsuits and togs in the early days.
Well, in Leinster, as I'm sure you're aware, you're not allowed to wear wetsuits. And one of the things we did, so I suppose, because we wanted to be as inclusive as possible, we said, well, provided that you're competent, wear a wetsuit, wear whatever you like, really. We didn't mind because we wanted, the more the merrier. So, and I suppose we didn't take things too seriously. If people wanted to race, that was their own business. The people wanted to actually, if it was important to them to actually have their time recorded, that in essence was also their own business. So we never took that side of things too seriously. And I think certainly for the earlier years of running swims down in this part of the country, that was an excellent idea because no one was ever turned away, apart from people, of course, that actually were unable to swim. And I was smiling and laughing when you were relating about one of the earlier. I think it was the first swim that actually Cork Masters, i.e., myself and a few other people. First time we were actually running the Shirkin swim because the local guard had started that 2 years previously. Pat Flaherty is his name.
Oh, yeah.
As part of the Shirkin regatta series of events. But the problem with that was that it was held on an August bank holiday weekend when the sea was absolutely full of boats, motorized and otherwise, on the water. So it was a little bit risky, one might say. So we took it over and decided we would hold it a bit later in the year when the boats, or most of the boats, were out of the water. And yes, you're entirely right. This young girl, we didn't know who she was. She was being sort of encouraged by her grandparents, in fact, who the grandfather is still alive in this area, and with a rowing boat. And they were very, very keen that their granddaughter took part, even though she couldn't swim. So yes, we had I think we had 3 rescue boats, and one of them, and probably a couple of the kayaks as well, from what I recall, were actually tied up with one entrant who had nothing to do with us. Yeah. So we've tightened up as much as we possibly can since, and insurance certainly wouldn't allow that type of thing to happen again.
Yeah. You experimented with handicap swims like the Dublin series, and I think you quickly abandoned it. I remember trying it one time, and there were about 12 of us, and I gave myself a 14-minute handicap, and there was a 10-minute handicap and a 0-minute handicap, and I finished 5 minutes after everybody. The next week, I gave myself a 10-minute handicap and finished 5 minutes ahead of everybody. And of course, as the honorable handicapper, I took a tremendous amount of abuse. And I just said, when the conditions change, as people are in shape, out of shape, it's absolutely impossible to do that. And with you can't take it too seriously, but at the best of times, it was just a nightmare.
Well, yeah, you can't take it too seriously. You're precisely right, because some people did take it too seriously, and they'd be arguing about their handicaps and telling me, or the organizers, that but I've been sick for the last 2 weeks and I haven't been swimming, and you'll have to send me off on go, only to find they came in 10 minutes ahead of the rest of the field.
Yeah.
And then there were, I suppose, the majority who didn't really give a damn. They just wanted to take part. So it's I suppose for better or for worse, a completely different ethos down in this neck of the woods compared with the Leinster Open crowd. But in fairness to them, they've been doing that for the bones of 100 years, and we haven't. It's still something relatively in its infancy down here after what would it be now? Wow, going on for what's it, 28, 29 years only. But
I think as well in Leinster, they're getting 200 plus men, 100 plus women, 15, 20 times a season at almost always a 1 mile-ish course, usually fairly protected waters, and they're used to it. Whereas you go from Sandycove to Shirkin to Guggenbarra to down a river in Cork, and completely different courses. And the whole wetsuit thing, I remember fondly racing Nick Mulcahy one time around Sandycove during the big race. And I was so pleased I beat him by 1 second. He was in a wetsuit, I was in togs. I frankly don't care if he had flippers and a fan in front of him. We were super close. And he turned to me and he said, "Yeah." He said, "You did well, kid." He said, "I was 2 seconds ahead last year, so I'm 1 second up on aggregate." And somebody said something like, "It's not fair. He's in a wetsuit." And I went, "I don't care. Like, you know what? I'm not getting $1 million for this. The loser's not getting killed. We had a great time out there. I don't care whether he's in a wetsuit or not for a bit."
Well, my best memories, they're talking about Nick Mulcahy. Of course, Nick and Simone then started a really, really beautiful swim down in Derrynan, which I'm sure you'll remember well, because my best memories of yourself and Nick were going at it hammer and tongs for that swim.
This is the one that just happened to have the only bar on the beach in Ireland.
Yep, that's the one.
I vaguely remember being there a few times.
Right. So it wasn't so much the race itself as the race to the bar. That's what you're saying, is it?
Look, it was a great excuse for a night or a weekend in Kerry. Beautiful beach.
A barbecue on the beach.
A barbecue on the beach outside of the trailer. The kids running around. Everybody having a good time. It remarkably was, my memory, it was always sunny, but I'm sure that wasn't always the case. And everybody just in a super happy mood. It was like a family gathering.
It was exactly like that.
Okay, let's bring it forward a tiny bit.
Okay.
Sandycove has a history these days of anti-clockwise swimming.
Yeah.
And okay. I'll tell you what I tell people about that today, but you have some at least one great story about why it kind of came to be anti-clockwise or counterclockwise.
Okay, so as you'll appreciate, if you swim in the morning and you go counterclockwise, you could have the sun in your face, but at least you can figure out where you're going by hugging the island. If you swim around it clockwise, however, in the afternoon, particularly in the afternoon from autumn onwards, you have a low sun in your face and you cannot figure out where you are going at all. And one winter's day, on one really sunny day, I think a few days before Christmas, Mike Harris and I headed off going clockwise around the island. And as we got closer to the final turn on the island, we realized that the sea was not only rough, but we could hear it crashing on the rocks, but we could see absolutely nothing. And the water was freezing cold, incidentally. So it was foolhardy, to say the least. I mean, it was foolhardy, just two of us being in freezing cold water. I can't remember the temperature at the time. Mike Harris at the time would try and have me believe that it was 6.5. I don't believe it was that cold, to be honest. Maybe it was sort of 7 or 8 or something degrees. But anyway, it was bitterly, bitterly cold. And so we turned around and we came all the way back around the island from whence we'd come. We got out at the Red House because I was too cold. I just could not physically go any further. And then Mike Harris bundled me into my car and he drove me up to my house in Sandycove at the time. And he put me in the shower and he said, "Can you feel the water?" And I couldn't even speak. And he said, "Is that hot?" And I just sort of shook my head. I think, "Is that cold?" And I just shook my head. And my wife and daughter at the time were most concerned about me. I couldn't talk. I couldn't stop shaking. And so Mike then said to my daughter, who would have been about 7 or 8, that's Kira, about 7 or 8 at the time, he said, "Right," he said, "what I want you to do," he said, "is to get a blanket and then wrap it round your dad, take him to bed, and then you're nice and warm. You cuddle him and warm him up." And by this stage, I was starting to thaw, and I said, "But how are you doing? Are you all right?" "Yeah, I'm all right, except I'm running late for my round of golf," he said. And off he went, and he drove off down to he drove down to Skibbereen to meet people to play golf. I couldn't believe it.
So I tell people there's two main reasons for it.
And
The
what's
first
that?
reason is often at what we call corner one, you get crashing waves.
Okay.
And I said it's a bit like a sailboat. If you're trying to put a sailboat onto a pier without an engine, you want to go into the wind so you have some control over the speed. So when you're going out into the waves, you can control your speed. Now, maybe sometimes you're going a little bit backwards, but you're not being pushed ahead. The problem is
Okay.
if you come in the other way and the wave pushes you, there's a bunch of rocks out there. It might land you on, and you have no control. And I said the second reason
That's quite right.
The second reason is what we call the second corner is just about halfway. Now, if you go anti-clockwise, at halfway, you've done the hardest part of the swim generally. And the second half of the swim, you've now got land on both sides of you, which is not necessarily hospitable land, but psychologically, there's land on both sides of you, and it's typically a little bit calmer. I hadn't really thought about the sun, but now that you mention it, there's often a problem when I'm coming back in that winter sun. Can't see anything, but I just know it's sort of 300 right arm strokes, and I'm unlikely to run into anything until I get close. We do still do what we call the reverse lap, and we do it in two circumstances. Circumstance number one is that it's a spring low water swim. And you cannot get around without scratching yourself if you go the traditional way. But if you go the other way, you've got at least 20 minutes of water to come in, which is probably about this much water, which is all the difference between blood and no blood. And the second circumstance we do it is if there's a strong northeast wind. Then you kind of have the wind behind you on the back of the island. Or if you're in the middle of a outgoing spring tide, it take you a less time to get out there because you got a little bit of a push.
Yeah, well, that makes sense.
And then let's kind of fast forward a little bit and mix up a couple of things. I think there were.
But before, can I just interrupt there? Before you go fast forward, do you remember the sprout? Sorry, what did we call them? The turkey swims.
These were the swims in the Christmas period.
That's right.
Where you'd pay a euro, an Irish pound to swim. I think it was back in those days, and then there would be a draw for all sorts of fabulous gifts like a freshly butchered turkey, which is still nearly running around, a bottle of fabulous wine that you would pick out. And I won a bag of Brussels sprouts one time. I thought I was just the only thing I ever won in my life was a bag of Brussels sprouts. I took it home like a trophy.
Well, it didn't put you off, obviously.
No, and it changed eventually to vampire swims for some reason in Cork in the last couple of years, where people dress up as vampires and do something similar. But it's a way to get people out in the non-traditional season of November and early December.
Anyway, sorry, getting back to where we were at, you just moving on there.
So in the early days, it was literally an hour one way or the other of high water. Very few people swam at low water. Very people swam during the height of the tide, which is a little less safe typically. And that meant that in the winter, you maybe got 4 swims in the month because of the way the tides worked.
And the
So,
light, the daylight, of
and
course.
the light,
Yeah.
and no one ever went at 6 o'clock in the morning. It wasn't that kind of group. So the midwinter tide swims used to be somewhere between 11 and 3. But you can only get four in a month. And I remember there were a couple of people, they were kind of gods who'd swum a double lap. I think Imelda was one of those who'd done like a double lap. You and Harris on a good year would do 60 laps. I think one of you once hit 100. It was a very big deal. And I remember Kieran Nolan one May did a double lap, and we were all I just couldn't believe that such a thing was possible. And that kind of brings me to just to accelerate the schedule a little bit. Um, at a certain point, I managed to convince people that I could do a schedule of swims for the year. Uh, I wasn't really worried about insurance for some reason. I just said, well, let's just put them on an email and for the whole year and just set the date so people know they don't have to wait till Thursday to find out what's happening on Saturday. Another key event happened was Martin Cullen, who's unfortunately passed away a few years ago. He was organizing a swim in Inishbofin I tried to get into. I was late. And he mentioned that he was organizing some English Channel relays. And this was in 2004. So I got together the core group and we listened to Martin, see if anybody was interested. And 12 people signed up. 12. Martin ended up with 30 people, 5 boats of 6 each teams. A couple of us ended up doing solos that year. And that was kind of the kickoff to the long distance. And then for a bit of fun, instead of doing English Channel in 2006, we decided we'd go to Alcatraz. And what started out as, again, 10 or 12, I kind of broached the subject because I'd done it a couple of times. I had no particular interest in going back, but like 12 of my friends signed up and I said, well, they're all going. I don't want to miss this party. We ended up with either 92 or 93 people going, swimming. I was getting calls from people in Northern Ireland going, look, is it a Cork only thing or can we join? The South End Rowing Club that organized the swim, they have Irish roots. The neighboring swim club, Dolphin, has Italian roots. They were going crazy when 10 people sort of from Ireland were coming. They were going absolutely nuts. I think we ended up entering 125, and there were 700 in the swim. The mayor of San Francisco declared it Cork Masters Swim Day of the year. They had a gathering the night before at the club. We were the only ones that showed up out of the 700. We just thought it was for us. The swim itself was a disaster because the boat captain was supposed to wait till everybody got in the water and pull the horn. When the first person jumped in the water, they pulled the horn and it took people 10, 15 minutes to get in the water. 600 people complained vigorously about the swim, and everybody from Ireland said we had a great time. And my other final memory was at one point we went up the top of the ferry and somebody started singing the Fields of Athenry, which I wasn't really familiar with, but I just thought we got north and south and somebody starts to sing, it's not going to be good. People remark about it to this day that they were on that boat and people started singing. They never heard anything like it. And then with those kind of just snippets, you then deserted us and moved to West Cork. You took all your talent, all your organization, and when did you piss off, by the way?
That was 2003. So I've
Okay.
been down here in West Cork for 20 years. September of this year. That was September 2003. I moved down here.
And your contributions, let's start with the swimming pool. Well, apparently there's a swimming pool down there. Is it one of those ones you blow up and put the water in it, or is it got rigid sides?
There used to be a hotel in Baltimore, a large hotel, and it had a pool and leisure center, but the hotel, for various reasons, it had, I think, structural issues, and then there were financial issues, and the hotel, and obviously the pool and leisure centre with it, went bankrupt. The liquidators, we contacted the liquidators, and someone called John Carney actually led this, a local resident, contacted the liquidators, and said, would there be any possibility of us buying the pool and leisure centre from the liquidators? So the liquidators said, well, we have somebody lined up to purchase the whole lot, but they say that one of the issues that makes it less attractive for them is the fact that they would be acquiring a swimming pool and leisure centre. So it was a match made in heaven in a sense. That we were now in a position to purchase on behalf of the local community the leisure centre and swimming pool. So we purchased that. That was 15 years ago now. It is still going strong. We've received lots and lots of grant support from various government and state organisations over the years. And yeah, it just goes from strength to strength, and it is the only pool in the Baltimore area. And yes, it still belongs to the community, and the community support it, thankfully. So I would say almost everybody, if not everybody, that has learned to swim in the last 15 years has probably learned to swim in the Baltimore pool.
And so once you moved down to West Cork, Loch Eine seemed to become more popular as a swimming destination.
Well, there was nobody, literally, it was just so peculiar. There was nobody actually swimming in there. And somebody said, I said to somebody, I went down there one day when I was, before I'd actually finished building the house. I wasn't even living here at the time, and that would have been early 2003. And I was speaking to some people down there, and I said, what is it like if you go out, in that direction? And I pointed in what turned out to be the direction of rapids. Oh no, you've got to be very careful down there and everything. And then there's the gap and there's an island. And I said, wow, an island! I didn't even know there was an island there. There's an island. So I had Adrian Nardone with me, and I can't remember who else it was. Maybe it was just Adrian actually. Oh no, it was Adrian and my daughter Kira. And so I said, come on, why don't we go and swim around the island? So we swam out, and then we saw the island sort of close up, and we swam around the island, and we came back, and that, as it appeared to be, was the start of swimming in Loch Eine. So, and then we heard that people had swum down, they'd gone out to the rapids on kayaks and what have you, or small boats, and then they had jumped in the water with a wetsuit, and we said, okay. So then we decided we'd swim down the rapids to Barlow. We got local information from the Bohan family, who are fishermen there, who actually have fishing rights in the lake, and I don't think anyone else does. And so they gave us quite a lot of support at the time. And so we were able to put Loch Eine on the map as an alternative West Cork swimming destination. And yep, we've been doing that since 2003, and that goes.
And how many people are involved in the lappers now, the Loch Eine lapper
The
group?
lappers, it sort of waxes and wanes. I think the lappers now is around a core group of about 30 people. But one has to appreciate, I mean, sadly, one or two of those people have passed away, and a number of the people would have been older than myself even, and they have just packed up the swimming, although they still go to social events. And people have moved away from the area, as young people usually do, sadly, because there's not a lot of employment in the area. So yeah, there's a core group of about 30 people, but we can still run local events, and we still do. And then people come from further afield, to do the Tregumna swim or the Shirkin swim.
Okay. No, it's a beautiful spot, an inland lagoon, 3-kilometer swim along the shore. Out around the island is very similar to Sandycove, a bit more than a mile. And I'm routinely bringing my Cork Distance Week group down there every year. We swim out, down the rapids, out to the ocean around that small rock, and back again. Reasonably safe adventure for everybody. And we stop in Skippereen at Annie Mae's for a delicious curry.
Well, it's become an institution since you started. I mean, how many years have you been
Uh,
on you guys?
I think it's 12 or 13 or something. The first one
Yeah.
was 2009, but
Okay.
we missed one COVID for sure. Tell us about your
Sure.
involvement in the unfortunate wretched soul named Steve Redmond. Um, how did he use your pool and leave it in good shape? I know he talks about going to Loch Island, but I never see him there. And then the Fastnet and the new Fastnet organization. So, what was your involvement with these characters? You froze, Steve.
Um, Sorry, I
Sorry,
didn't
you're
hear what
okay. You so
I said.
just to repeat, Steve Redmond, the Fastnet organization, and what was your involvement with these both of these continuing involvement, and how does it all play into your story down there?
Okay. So start off with the Steve Redmond story. If you recall, when we were based in Sandycove, swimming in Sandycove, we were asked over a period of years if we could supply swimmers for the Skull Triathlon, where they would enter a team of three. There were solo, what we could call it, participants, but there were also teams of three that included a swimmer, a cyclist, and a runner. And more often than not, and I think that's still the case today, people come from running or cycling disciplines rather than swimming to become triathletes. So they were always short of swimmers. And you and I and a bunch of others from Sandycove, Rob Bahan, Mike Harris, quite a few of us would go down and we would support them and take part as the swimmer for the various teams. So you and I turned up one year and we had been informed that there was somebody that was running the show, clerk of the course, I think he was. And he wanted to, his name was Steve Redham, and he wanted to speak to you and I about sea swimming. And it was as vague as that. And you and I turned up, and someone came up to us and introduced himself, and he said, "Hi, I'm Steve Redmond. And I was told to come and speak to yourselves. I did an Ironman, but I'm having to give that up. My knees are sort of wrecked. And I want to now concentrate on learning to sea swim." And you said to him, "And what experience do you have of sea swimming?" And he said, "Well, for the Ironman, I did a sort of a slow breaststroke. I'm not a swimmer, so it's pretty basic for me. I'm sort of I'm starting from sort of almost a blank sheet, and any pointers or assistance or ideas or whatever you can give me, I'd be very grateful." And you said to him, "Well, what are your aspirations?" Which is an Nedism, actually, that I use quite a lot, I have to say. "What are your aspirations?" says Ned, looking down on top of the man's bald head. And he looked up at you and he said, "Well, I've signed up for the English Channel next year." And you, Ned, turned and you looked at me and you looked at him and you shook your head and you said, "This guy's crazy," or something to that effect. And you just wandered off and left me with this bald stranger. And my goodness me, I mean, he teamed up with Sarah McKnight, who you probably know, who is an excellent coach. And he was actually extremely fortunate to have her literally on his doorstep. And well, off he went. And he did, I think, at the time, the slowest Irish crossing of the English Channel in history of 20 hours and 6 minutes. And then various people at a party that was being held to honor Channel swimmers for a particular year at some fella called Ned's house. People came up to him and said, "Oh, you can probably get away with swimming the English Channel if you're not a real swimmer, but you must never contemplate doing the North Channel." And we were driving back in the car in the early hours of the morning from your place, and he said to me, "What
What's
the
the
F is
North
this?"
Channel?
Sorry?
What's the North Channel?
He said, "What the F is this North Channel?" And these so-and-sos, they were telling me about this, telling me this and telling me that. And he was, I suppose, a little bit upset that people had described him at this stage as, as a non-swimmer, even though he had done the English Channel. And so I told him the little I knew about the North Channel. And that wasn't a lot. Well, this was at about 2 o'clock in the morning. He phoned me at just after 8 o'clock the following morning. And he says, "I just want to tell you," he said, "I've signed up for the North Channel." Um,
I said to Steve that he was very unkind to nature back in those years. He used to
yeah.
describe himself as driftwood slow. And I said, no, 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 no. I've seen driftwood goes quicker than you know. Steve, of course, went on to become the first person in the world to complete the Ocean Sevens. Is one of those people that when people come to Cork for the Cork Distance Week, they want to go meet Steve. We had him down at the Tool Hire place. Occasionally comes to Annie Mae's, and then Steve did some very famous fastnet swims. How did the fastnet organization come to be?
Okay, so the Fastnet organization came about because um, Steve Redmond had actually, as one of his or a number of his training swims, he had swum from Baltimore out to the Fastnet, from Baltimore round the Fastnet and across the Skull, and various things like this. And a bunch of friends of his, actually, more, I didn't know them. They came to me and they said, "Oh, they want to take up sea swimming." That would be Noel Brown, Mihal Hurley,
Yeah.
Sean Murray, and Owen O'Sullivan. And they said, "Yeah, we'd really like to sort of do this. You know, Steve is telling us we must speak to you." And I said, "Well, what do you want to do?" And anyway, between the lot of us, and that included Steve, we decided that the best thing that they could do is think about doing the Straits of Gibraltar. So I got them signed up for the Straits of Gibraltar, but now they had to train. And in the case of two of those people, they actually had to learn to swim. That was Sean Murray and Mihal Hurley. And Owen, being based on a rig off Brazil, had nowhere to swim or to train. He wasn't allowed to go in the sea. Hello?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Sorry, yeah, I lost you for a moment. So Owen was training on a swimming table on an oil rig off Brazil somewhere. The swimming table with elastics and various things for resistance. And the other fellas, we were all training in the pool in Baltimore, so that was quite handy that we still had the pool. And we all went down to Gibraltar, and a mist came down, and their swim was called off, and they had to postpone the swim for a couple of years. And in the meantime, since they were swim fit, they were wondering what they could do. You know, what will we do now? You know, all this is wasted. We'll have to do something. Well, anyway, I think it must have been Steve that put the daft notion in their head that they should go out on a boat to the Fastnet and swim to Baltimore. So that's what they did. So Mihal didn't, because he'd injured himself in the meantime. But the other three swam from the Fastnet to Baltimore, and then Noel Brown saw that, having told people this about the swim, that there were a lot of people now interested. So over a period of 4 years, Noel, Kieran Collins, and then Nathan Timmins, who also did the Fastnet swim at a later date, they decided they should actually put some commercial venture together. And that is what we have today. I'm not involved in it at all. I told them I just didn't have the time. If they want to run with this venture, that I'd certainly give them 110% encouragement, or be there if they wanted to discuss things, which they did in the beginning. But beyond that, I'm not involved at all in it.
So, Steve, I'm gonna wrap up now. I want to thank you very much for giving us some of the history, helping us preserve it for the future. I will be talking to people like Joe Donnelly about the Lee swim. That's not to say you didn't have a tremendous input in that as well.
Well, and yourself as well. Don't forget.
Yeah,
That was the only time I actually thought there was a chance I was going to get in ahead of Ned, if you remember the trial swim, because you didn't take into account the currents, did you? Do you remember that?
the trial swim was 2004. The main drains had been completed in 2001 or two or something. We started at a set of greasy slipway steps with a yellow waterfall over our head, if I remember right. Until recently, I had the only recorded person who swam over a bridge in the River Lee. There was a cable to start a bridge. I did my water polo thing, went up and over. And I remember we came around the far corner, and I think it was you and somebody else stuck on the letter E on this boat. Um, the you eventually got in. The fireman hosed us off. We had a few drinks, and we went to Pete Mulcahy's house. The door opened up, and the smell of curry just unbelievable smell of curry. Somebody asked his lovely wife Tisha what kind of curry it was. She, with a straight face, she said mullet.
Very good.
And I've not missed a Lee swim since then. Listen,
Ah,
Steve,
good.
Steve, thank you very much, and we'll see you for a drink one of these days soon.
All right. Keep up the good work and thanks a lot, Ned.
Take care. Bye.
Bye for now.